Good morning. This is work. Okay. I try third time. Good morning. Okay. I think you understand that I'm awake and I know it's the morning. Now, I am very pleased and want to thank the National Informatics Institute, the able staff people, Kei Kurokawa, and Hayashi-san, who have spent a lot of time with me, and other people who are here, with whom I have had a very stimulating several days of very stimulating conversation to prepare me, so that I might be more informed of the context in which you are going to receive or attempt to receive what I want to talk about. And I think the title and the subtitle are pretty descriptive of my intention, which is to talk about sort of what I understand the term open science is about, and what, perhaps through my influence and that of others who preceded me and who came after me, have also come to understand what open science is. And I will try to talk about why it is important, because of its beneficial potentials for the advancement of knowledge and for the benefits that flow from greater knowledge, both in terms of human welfare and well-being, and the processes of economic growth that are driven by the advancement of knowledge. I also want to talk about open science as a social, economic, and knowledge system, which takes institutionalized forms for some very important aspects of it, but is a fragile system. It is a fragile system, as you will understand, because it is not guided by market forces in a direct way. That is, it is not producing a product which is sold. The knowledge is not to be treated as property in a private market system within the open science system. The way, oh, yes, okay, fine. Yeah, usually if I do this with most microphones, it makes a squealing sound, which is different from my squealing sound, anyhow. So I want to talk about the problems. Once we understand what it is, to talk about the problems that arise in its functional performance. Almost no systems are perfect. This system is like other important systems, less than perfect, and some of these problems are more serious than others, and that means there is an impulse of people who come to observe and to be part of the system, that these systems perhaps could be remedied, could be fixed. I have not come to tell you how to fix these remedies, but I want to say some things briefly about how not to fix them. Do you want me to sit down? No? Yeah, I prefer to stand. Yeah. If I could be in touch with this by wandering across the stage, which is the way I usually lecture, I would do that at the risk of falling off it, as one of my beloved professors used to do quite regularly. We all were trying to sit in the front row to catch him when he stepped off. Okay, so what I have to present to you, I've called this is instead of an outline or an agenda, very formal. I offer a menu with three courses. Okay, these three courses correspond to part 1, part 2, and 3. And the first course, and I have to say that I use the word menu with some fear, because it is always possible that you present people a menu of things which they cannot digest. So we try to make it more digestible. So the first important understanding of open science is it is a system. It is not a state of the world. The system exists, but it is dynamic. It is changing. It has evolved. It's a peculiar system, especially in modern societies, where the penetration of market modes of organization and incentives are tied up with market valuation of people's services and their ability to purchase other things using money. This is not a system in which market transactions is central to motivate people or to evaluate what their contributions are. It's peculiar for that reason, and yet it is vitally important. It has evolved as it has historical roots, and these historical roots are deep. And if we understand the system, then we understand that it is a historical legacy, a gift from an earlier epoch, one which was characterized in the West by feudal organization of society, not in the sense that Marx used it of having a superior property owning class and then a landless proletariat who work for them, but a system that the historian Bloch saw as peculiarly European, but not everywhere in Europe, a system of vassalage in which there are strong people who claim control of landed resources and then give followers who are useful to them, firstly in a military sense. They give them a right to say that they can exploit the resources of a particular part of the land. So they get an estate. And for this, they have to provide services to the person who gives them. This arrangement is a very older one from in pre-feudal history in Europe. And this system structured the relationships among the elite, and the elite had a need in a more modern setting than the original one for people with special knowledge of various kinds to be in their court and to perform services which could not be done by just anyone. Okay, and the origins of the word feudalism and in the old French féodal, it had to do with things concerned with the fief, and the fief was the holding of someone who could perform a special service. It started with special military service and then went on to a scribe, a person who could write and could send messages to other people for the lord of this estate, because they were not always literate. In fact, few of them were. Okay, so this system was entangled with a development in the knowledge domain through the incorporation of Arabic and Indo-European mathematics, which gave a powerful tool for the investigation of physical systems, the universe, the planets, the solar system. and then phenomena which were evident on our terrestrial globe. Yes. Okay. And and that those two things working together cause this system, because of its beneficial uses for scientific organization and communication, it became entangled with and was important in this scientific revolution of the 17th century. So it was not the same as the scientific revolution. It was if you like, an organizational form for creating networks through which information about the discoveries of the new science at the time could be propagated and could be the basis for further advances. Okay, so that's the characteristics of this social system is the thing I want to try to impress upon you of its complexity, like many other social systems. Okay, and then I will go on at the end of this, and I think I will ask Hayashi-san to tell me when I have about 15 minutes left. Okay, and then I will talk about first the three significant performance problems that are perceived and recognized in the open science system, and they occur at three levels: at the level of individual behavior, at the level of organizational coherence and lack of internal conflict within organization, which affects which degrades performance, and lastly, at a system level, where the other aspects of knowledge and its applications are adversely affected by malallocation of scientific resources. So misdirection of scientific resources, either too much in one direction and therefore not enough in other directions, or other structural things which I will mention tend to degrade the system. And the last part is very brief, because I do not have solutions for all of these problems. I have thought about the three that I've talked about, and at best, I have a policy message which is the same in all cases. It is the message which doctors are asked to follow when they enter the profession, which is do no harm. In other words, when treating the patient, the most important thing is not to kill the patient or cripple or damage the patient in any way which was not absolutely necessary to save the life. Okay, so these are some cautionary message about how not to go about fixing the problems of the three types which I've mentioned. Okay, so that was not the development. Okay, and so here's a. So I've been told that many of the people who are here today, thank you for your presence, are people who work on libraries, conventional libraries, repositories for digital material, the curation of those materials, how they can be searched, which means how the internal information can be structured so it's accessible through search for particular subtopics, and I received some helpful, motivating insight about the framework of which people are listening to me talking about something which they may not recognize, but the central problem is depicted in this very nice graphic at the beginning of a paper by Professor Fugakai. On the open basis of scientific knowledge, of the transactions of ideas via repositories and other academic communication possibilities of the university libraries, which he presented at the 18th Library Fair 2 years ago. And the point about it was to say, this is a system which is now in transition. It is a system, a complicated system. It is a system which links together the activities of individual actors, groups of actors, and institutions which are have the role of being libraries where you can go, and repositories from which you can now extract things because they are in digital form. The extraction of them is very easy and can be highly targeted and selective. The role of the libraries in the production of knowledge on the left, as you see, is a traditional one. It's quite linear in its needs. Okay, so we have needs for research by end users. This leads them to use the resources which they require for research, maybe previous documentation of research, sometimes data which was also generated by researchers and now storable, and you can access it and use it for your own purposes. And so there is a need to have collections, structured collections of this, and then the suppliers of the function of storing and retrieving, okay, are librarians essentially in this model, okay, and from the knowledge comes satisfaction of some of the needs for research for the researchers, and so it goes around in a nice linear way, okay. The one on the right-hand side is a schematic of the system that you are coping with, which is evolving now and which is having new functions. Some of them are created by the advances in digital information technologies and the discovery of things that they can do with this digital material. Some of them are quite new, and they require new adaptation on the part of those who provide repositories, so to make them useful. Okay, so we have not discovered all the things that can come out of the use of these techniques and the ways of utilizing them and curating them and distributing them, which have yet to be developed in practice. Okay, so it is being shaped. Okay, again. So, okay, so that's my way of increasing the digestibility of things I'm saying by giving you the belief that I now have learned something about the interest that you may have in the topic of open science, which has come to you through a peculiar route of being the characteristics of giving access, open access to digital resources and structuring the way that they can be distributed, used, curated, and their use can also be recorded, and the patterns of its use, which are informative about the activities of researchers, also now can be made useful, public, for people to allocate resources to them. So it's a quite central thing that the role of these repositories and the collections that they contain have come to play in resource allocation not always, I think, for the best of the activities to which the resources are being allocated, in particular, the conduct of research in the open science mode. Okay, part one. So to understand this system, we need, it's easiest to start with the idea that like other social organizations and self-organized entities, they acquire important reinforcement through the emergence of a shared normative structure. A set of norms are the way telling people what is, if you like, proper behavior, what is appropriate behavior, not everywhere, but in the company of other people who are part of the social system with which you are interacting. So it's a set of norms. You go into another culture, people have to tell you how to behave. Okay, and so these are behavioral norms, and the behavioral norms, in turn, become both constraints and developments which improve the functioning of the institutions, and which the formalized institutions which are needed to organize, reinforce, and transmit the modes of operation to successive generations of people who work within this system. So we need to say something about that. And then I'll comment on the fact that I told you that there is this other strange system called open science, which is not the market system. And there is a market system. Enterprises conduct research in their laboratories. They patent and license their discoveries. They commercialize the product by licensing it and interacting with the people who are users. This is kind of user learning becomes a source of learning and understanding for the producers of new devices and services which support research. And so now the question is, why do we have two separate, distinct systems, open science and commercialized science? Okay, and that is a question for which the short answer is they are in conflict at many points, where it comes to the different motivations that they give rise to, and therefore affect behavior, both of individuals and organizations of individuals, which have different goals. The goal of increasing the net worth of a business corporation or a startup firm, on one hand, and on the other, advancing the career of the researchers to enable them to mobilize resources from the society which they cannot obtain by selling what they, because that to sell it you would have to transfer property, and what they have is ideas, knowledge, and knowledge is a very, very difficult thing to transact in for money. Okay, if I come and tell you I have a fantastic idea for a soft drink, a beverage, okay, it will make you a lot of money, and then the person says, well, what is it? I'll say, well, if I tell you what it is, then you have it. Okay, so how do I tell you what it is without having given it away? Okay, so now we have complicated ways in which you can transact in new knowledge. How can you get some reward for giving it away? Okay, and so that's the germ of the idea that there was a circumstance in the history in which those people who created new knowledge found that in order to get some benefit from them, to allow them to go on doing what they wanted to do in the knowledge domain, they had to give away to others. They had to disclose to others what they were doing, and to allow others to verify that this was not a fraud, that having the knowledge of it would allow you also to do things which you otherwise could not do. Okay, so so now the question is, what are the two things? Why do these two things, which have a conflict at the level of incentive, because the goals of the parties are different, and they, when it comes to the level of their need to solve some economic problems, personal or organizational. So why do most of the modern societies have both systems, okay, which seem to be in conflict with one another? And they are. But I will tell you why it is that they are also complements, okay? Why together, if kept in balance properly, they produce things which neither of the subsystems can do on their own, okay? And then there is the question of how did we get such a system? Because sometimes it's, in order to understand what we have to have an idea of how it came about. Because often the roots of something new, a new system, reveal something about the central purposes for which the system came to have adherence, and people to say, I want to work within the system and to elaborate it. I want to be able to develop and spread and have more adherence. Okay, so I try to talk about that as not too quickly, I hope, for people to follow. But we could spend a lot of time talking about these things, which is slightly just elaborate the puzzling phenomena of open science. Okay, how did, in a world characterized by secrecy about knowledge, not to be shared with most people, a dangerous thing, knowledge, a dangerous and disruptive thing. And so how does a transition come about where people got the idea that the thing to do was actually, in the end, to publish it, make it available to everybody, make it understood, let other people show for themselves whether it worked or not work. Okay. When you have a phenomena in the social sciences, you can try to explain it in two different ways, fundamentally different ways. One is trying to find when it originated, how it came about. Okay, that's in the second option under 2, the logical origins. You try to find. If it didn't exist logically, why would people want to create it? Okay, this is well. For that, they would have to understand what was missing in order to say this is the logical answer to the question of why can't we do this? Okay, or why don't we have that? And so that essentially takes a functional explanation. When you say, what does this process of this system do for us? What is its function? Because without a function, people will not go on doing it, except if the function is entertainment. If it is kind of purely some for symbolic purposes, but at a functional level, there's a need for knowledge to operate in the world by transforming other things and generating energy, controlling it, manipulating physical goods, and going about trying to discover what new things can be explained and how they can be applied and so forth. So those are functional reasons. But logical origins proceed with to say, well, we need this. I can imagine we would need this and we would invent it today. And so it must have been the case in the past that at some point people saw they needed it and logically, and that's why they created it. But this does not explain why things didn't begin ab initio, okay, when the first person said, oh, we need something like this, okay, why it took, why many centuries passed, and why people live within the opposite system, which was we don't need to share things, we don't need to cooperate, we don't need to make this available to as many people as could understand it, and to educate them so that they could understand it, okay. So not before the 16th century did we get a set of conditions in Europe which at least was sufficient to motivate people within the dominant system of vassalage, in which there were people who had a lot of resources, they were the lesser or greater nobility, and other people who were capable of doing things which they were interested in having performed in their court, on their estates. They wanted the knowledge of people about things like armaments and defense, aggressive. They needed to be able to calculate the trajectory of arrows, cannonballs, and so forth. They needed to be able to design a castle, which once you had use explosives, gunpowder, projecting cannonballs and other heavy objects, you need to be able to figure out how to design the wall of your castle so that the projectile would bounce off. Okay, 15 minutes. Okay. And so there's a story there about old motivations for patronage, and then the problem caused by the new mathematics, which made the things that the noble people were interested to have someone in their court who knew about these things, but the new source of knowledge was heavily mathematized, and very few of the nobles, with the exception of a few mathematical Italian princes, actually could follow what these people were doing mathematically. So the problem was that you wanted to have one of these people, but you didn't know for yourself whether this was a good person, a knowledgeable person. You know, if somebody said, "No, I am a maker of lutes and I can make fine lutes," you could listen to the lutes that they made. You could look at them. If they said, "You know, I work in silver and gold and I can make silver objects for your table to serve with and so forth," you could see whether what they produce. But with these other people, it's in their head. Okay, they say, "I can perform amazing things which will astound visitors to your court, and I can solve problems for you that are practical problems which no other people yet have found out how to use." Okay, so there's this problem that what the experts know, the people who need the expertise can't understand for themselves. They would have to become like the experts in order to understand them. Okay, and so to make it cut it brief, this is called informational asymmetry. It exists as a major problem today in government contracting. You have contractors who are going to build something for you. It can be a new transport system. It can be a new modern airport design. It can be a new armament system. And they tell you we can build it so it will work like this and it will cost like this. And then the question is, how do we know to trust them? Okay, so I need to This is a problem which exists in all specialized services. Your doctor understands and knows things that he cannot, that he could try to explain to you, but not having been trained as a doctor, this would take him a lot of time. And if you don't understand it, then you don't know whether what he's telling you is nonsense or can't work, or is meant to deceive you. And so you have to be able to have a basis for trusting that this person has been, in some sense, certified. That's people who know about what he's talking about or she is talking about will tell you, no, this is a person who is reputable. I know about his work. Okay, and you need more than one. Okay, you need some people who are not even friends of this person, especially not friends, but who have never met the person. Okay, to tell you, oh, his reputation, her reputation has preceded her. She's well known in the domain that she's talking about. Yes, this is a person you should trust, and if they tell you to do something, you should accept them, because they have a the esteem of their peers, people who know what they are talking about, say, yes, this is a person whose work I know, I trust it, because I've been able to have access to it and show for myself that it works. If not me, then somebody else who I know has tried it. Okay, and so uh, the ways in which people could demonstrate that they had this knowledge became important to solve this relationship between the people who had the new way of working in science, Galileo and those who followed him, Boyle, Newton, all of those people. Okay. Okay. You have some printout, I think, of an early version of this, and you'll know that things go very, very fast. And these are the points I want to make about grasping the norms. The key institutionalized norms were identified actually much earlier by Robert Merton, who wrote about these properties of the correct way to do modern science, first in 1938, and was motivated to publish it in his thesis in articles before making a book in the 1970s. And there was he published a thesis in 1942 during the war, and it did have a strong political animus to it. It was in some sense an attack and critique of Nazi science, of the destruction of what we generally recognize as a leadership position in the physical sciences, in chemistry and physics at that time, in Germany in the early part of the 19th century. Everybody went there to study postgraduate work or to be in contact with them. So he emphasized cooperation, not authoritarian control. Cooperation is voluntary. Universalism, which was did not say who could practice science on the basis of some ascriptive state, as when they were born, what their culture was, and so forth, what religion they might have. But it was universal. Entry to it was on the basis of merit, of demonstrated merit. That people should be disinterested in the specialized sense that they didn't have a private interest in the knowledge because it would benefit them. They didn't, therefore, they didn't have a priori desire for what the truth would turn out to be, but what they had instead was a passionate interest which was personally disinterested. They were interested in the problem and finding the solution. Openness, and that had to do with two senses of openness. It had the openness of the pursuit, yes, okay, and then skepticism, the ability to freely challenge somebody and to exercise, if you like, a kind of affirmative skepticism to say, well, okay, I've followed you so far, but what about this? This part of it doesn't seem to be to follow logically. Doesn't seem to follow. It doesn't to be questioning. Okay, so those are all things which are gave rise to you have idealized socialized norms, uh, uh, which I think are self-explained here. Um, and the full disclosure of findings and methods was just one part of it, which is necessary, and the expectation of verification by replication by one's peers. Those are the conditions of the social norms that people cannot be personally offended by people who question them and want to see the evidence and so forth and so on. Um, Whereas, okay, there are procedural arrangements, and the procedural arrangements depend upon rewards which are based on the things that come when you have reputational status, when your peers will say, yes, this person has done very, very good work, and that tends to increase the rewards of your your university in seeking to have you teach and seeking to have you do research there. And similarly, it might lead you actually to have business firms want to consult with you, not necessarily employ you, but seek your knowledge in some way. The reputation based on peer appraisal of your scientific contributions, not your politics or anything else. That you have eligibility for evaluation, as I said, based on non-descriptive characteristics of who is the author, and contributions which involve valid claims to priority in discovery or invention. And the last arises from the problem that how do you know somebody is working? You cannot actually monitor what they're doing. The physicist in a nice warm bath is thinking very hard about the problem, but you cannot find that out by watching him or her in the bath, as entertaining as that might be. Uh, uh, you can only have it give it to somebody who claims to have been the first person to discover it if they show it first. So disclosure is the important way in which you claim to have been not copying what somebody else has done, but to have done it yourself. So priority of claims becomes important. It becomes something which is disputed sometimes. There are priority conflicts and claims. So there's the aspect of rivalry for the reputation is present in this system, which makes for non-cooperative behavior. You would like to slow down your rivals, okay? But on the other hand, you will have to disclose what you're doing. You just want to disclose it before they do, okay? So there is an aspect of an inner tension within the system. I think that was a signal for me to move rapidly forward. There are there's lots of detail in here about the system, its relationship to the scientific revolution, and I just want to pause to say that the leaders who grasped this system in their scientific work were also still engaged in the world of secret knowledge, of alchemy, uh, uh, and this records um, uh, the notebooks of Newton, who wrote more words about alchemy and chemical alchemy, 1.2 million words, more than anything he published about his scientific discoveries. He belonged to a circle of alchemists, which included people like Robert Boyle. This is in the late 1600s, and they were in the world of secret knowledge, and they believed that it was a bad thing to release this prematurely because such knowledge could be very dangerous. They didn't quite know. Okay. Okay. So the way this is the problem which I've mentioned before was initially solved by people demonstrating what they knew. Mathematicians who had algorithms would challenge people who were skilled abacusists as to who could do the calculations faster to solve an established problem. Or they would pose a new problem and say, yeah, let the abacusists try to do that. And there were other kinds of challenges, open challenges, reputational competition gave rise, as I said, to priority disputes, and people found other ways to get direct confirmation, of which probably the most famous one is time is up. Okay. All right. If we go through all of this, we'll eventually get to. If I have 5 more minutes, then what I would like to do is to escape. I can focus on the problem of scientific misconduct. Yes. So I want to talk to you about at the level of individual behavior, very briefly, uh, uh, and to contrast the way in which people are talking about scientific misbehavior kind of a priori without reference to the oh, this is good. The slides are going to change whether I change them or not, it seems. But I'm not sure that I can make them change faster. Yes. So by misconduct, it has come to not to include honest errors, sexual harassment, scientific discourtesy, and so forth. Three forms of scientific misconduct, which I'm sure you are aware of: fabrication, falsification of data, and plagiarism. Okay. I will shock you by saying that most of the investigated cases where we have data, plagiarism is not. It does not figure centrally. It is a problem largely in one domain only, I think, which is plagiarism gives rise to it corrupts the value of certification through education. If people can get their twin brother to come and sit the examination because their twin brother is much smarter than they are, then we have certified somebody who really shouldn't be certified. And that corrupts the idea of an educational system which produces a measure of competence and so forth. Otherwise, plagiarism, from my viewpoint, is a victimless crime. Nobody is hurt by it. Why? Because plagiarists take something which is little known, has been published someplace in an obscure journal, and republish it in maybe the same slightly different form, and bring it back to the notice of people who have overlooked it, because anything worth plagiarizing is better than something which is allowed to go on indefinitely. Okay. Who is hurt by it? The original author is not hurt, because people pay attention to the fact that this author published something which was ignored. It was published couldn't be published in an important journal. It was published someplace just to make sure it was published on the person's CV. Okay, and so now it's been rescued from obscurity. Okay, the whether the plagiarist, if attention is called to the value of this piece, it usually awakens people who remember that it was somebody else who worked on this first, and so the plagiarist does in general, even if they're not, if they're charged or sued or in some other way, the plagiarist doesn't benefit very greatly for this for very long. Okay, so and usually good plagiarists are also publishing good work on their own in some cases. So kind of pathological cases. I could have written this paper better than they have, because I published all of these other papers, and using the same approach that I've used, I could have rewritten this paper and it would be better, and I did. So okay, so then so this is a kind of a problem. Okay. So we have spectacular cases in which very well-known, established people, famous people, before Hauser, there were there were others um, in biomedical science and cloning who used fabricated images and presented the same image as representing many instances of cloned organisms. Okay, and then there were before the physicists who wrote a spectacular number of papers in physics, working at the IBM lab in Geneva, which all turned out to have also been fabricated. Okay, the results didn't work. Uh, People think about this in one of two ways. There is the model of open science, in which you violated one of the norms, and then you're punished by loss of peer respect. And alternatively, the crime and punishment approach, which Gary Becker, an economist, says, okay, this is a question of what is the probability, what is the probable benefits that you get? So that's the probability of not being caught doing it, and what value you get from having successfully claimed this paper. So claimed, you, you, it attracts attention, and you're not caught. So that's a benefit. Then on the other hand, there is what happens if you're detected. Okay, so then the question is, how large is the punishment that you suffer? Okay, so people approach this if we want to say this. Well, the problem is that you've not made the detection system strong enough. Okay, and you've not made the punishment uh, severe enough. So we could reduce the frequency with which this happens. Okay. That's one approach, and the other is no. You have to educate people so that they don't do this because it's wrong. It's a violation of the norms, and your colleague will eventually detect it, or the young people who work in your lab will see it, and you say that they will, if they've been properly educated, they will know that this is inappropriate behavior, and somebody should report it to somebody who is sort of overseeing their work and funding them and so forth. Okay. Um, uh, Very little data is available, and so was based on data which became available uh, uh, really from 1996 onward, uh, through the office, what became the Office of Research Integrity, which supervised cases where there were allegations of misconduct. Uh, they didn't investigate. They started to try to investigate them themselves. They got out of that very quickly. By 1995, they became they just supervised the investigations conducted by the institution at which received research. And since this organization was part of the public health system, uh, uh, it focused on uh, biomedical procedures, drugs, and devices. So it is one domain. And it turns out that this domain, because of its close connection with application, was a domain in which there's a high rate uh, of people uh, who are in this domain. It is the biomedical sciences are growing very rapidly in this period, but it's also true that the intensity of allegations, maybe a lot of rivalry, there are allegations, but also opportunities for people to enhance their career. Uh, and this relative position, the relative importance of biomedical science uh, has uh, has has been maintained. Uh, and you see that there is a distribution uh, of young people, postdocs, okay, uh, and then other researchers. The share of postdocs is higher in the biomedical sciences. Lab size has increased. The scale of the conduct of science is no longer the solo scientist or a very small group working together. It is large teams, and the teams have, in addition to postdocs, other researchers, some of whom are not are themselves not scientists. They're not scientists in the literal sense. They're technical, or they're administrative. They are supporting nurses who monitor patients in a field trial. Sort of are neither researchers nor are they technical people. Okay, so the interesting thing about this is that positions held, when you look at the positions that are held by people who are involved, time is up. So the main things that are interested is that the open science model can't account for the behavior because these people are violating norms. The basic crime and punishment model doesn't help because there are a lot of people who are very brilliant and slightly crazy, and they believe that they will not be a detective and that they will go on. So that's not rational. Okay, and so
All time is up.
and so the point about this is trying to fix this problem by making the punishments greater doesn't affect those people who don't think that they'll be caught. And for people who are very early in the stage or only marginally entering the field, the typical punishment was to prevent them from getting grants. Well, for most of them, they're more or less alienated from the area because they can't even get a second year as a postdoc, much less a tenure position, and they don't think that being prevented from getting a grant is really going to be an incremental problem for them. They can't get a grant anyhow. Okay, so people are picking the wrong things, and then it turns out, and this is the last point, that where the I'll take this this liberty of saying that this is who gets charged and who's found guilty in this. The people who are charged most frequently and where it's established that they did do this are the young graduate students and postdoctoral students are in this group of, so of all cases, about 2/3 of them are for them in this field. And then as you go down, you see that at the lower ends, associate professors, assistant professors, research assistants are in a kind of liminal state. Full professors, even lower probability of being charged and found guilty and found responsible. And the thing that's an anomaly here is that if you like, the industrialization of research in the biomedical sciences has led to the same kinds of problems of alienation and anomie on the part of the people who work on the assembly line, okay, not the designers, okay, and they are not mentored, they are not made to feel that they're part of that they're part of what the lab is doing, and that's important as in the socialization of open scientists. That if you don't do your job properly, you are hurting a good cause of which you should feel a part. Okay? And so that's a failure of the system lies in the organizational failure to respond to the increasing specialization of function and the need to do research on a different scale. And it's most evident in this area in biomedical research and needs to be addressed by different ways. Okay, so that's a kind of paradigm, and I could go through and give you other examples, which I will not.
Yeah, thank you for your additional information.
Maybe later.
Yeah. どうもありがとうございました。